My daughter-in-law called it a patchwork disaster. She said it in front of 40 people at my grandson's 7th birthday party. Then folded my late wife's quilt and dropped it into a Salvation Army box, like it was nothing. Dorothy made that quilt with her own hands over 2 winters. She sewed the dates into the fabric where no one would think to look. She sewed something else in there too. Jolene never checked. Most mornings now, I sit on the front porch with my coffee and watch the light come through the live oaks before the street gets busy. My name is Russell Jennings. I am 70 years old. And I have learned that the most valuable things in life are usually the ones that do not look like anything to people who are not paying attention. By the end of this story, you will understand exactly what I mean by that. The party was Jolene's idea. She organized it at my house, which I did not agree to, so much as I failed to prevent. One afternoon I came home from the hardware store and found her in my living room with a clipboard and a woman I had never met who was apparently in charge of napkin arrangements. Jolene told me it made more sense to hold Beau's birthday here because the house had more space, and before I could point out that her house had twice the square footage of mine, she was already on the phone with the caterer. By 7 that evening, there were close to 40 people moving through rooms I barely recognized anymore. Jolene had replaced the curtains weeks earlier. She had moved the family photographs to the back bedroom and put up mirrors that made the hallway look like it belonged in a magazine rather than a house where a child had once learned to walk. The bookshelves Dorothy had filled over 30 years were half empty now, the rest of the volumes boxed up in the garage to make space for what Jolene called a cleaner line. I stood near the kitchen doorway with a glass of water and watched her work the room. She had a way of moving through a crowd that reminded me of someone directing traffic. Smooth, purposeful, and entirely convinced that every car should be going her direction. She introduced me to a couple near the front window. "This is Mitchell's father," she said. "Not my father-in-law. Not Russell. Mitchell's father," as if I were a footnote in someone else's biography. Mitchell was near the back porch talking to 2 men I did not know. He looked comfortable in the way he always looked comfortable at these things, which is to say, he looked like a man who had learned to stand in rooms his wife had arranged without ever asking whether he wanted to be there. He waved when he saw me. We did not have a real conversation that night. There was always someone between us, and I had begun to suspect that was not an accident. Beau found me near the hallway. He had been circling the party the way children circle adult gatherings, half interested, half invisible. He tugged my sleeve and pointed toward the front room, toward the chair by the window. Dorothy's chair. The quilt was still there, draped over the armrest the way it had been since the day she died. Beau looked at it, then looked up at me, and I understood what he was asking, without him needing to say it. Before I could answer, Jolene's voice cut through the noise behind us. "Oh my God. I thought I told Mitchell to move that thing." She crossed the room in 4 steps, and I watched her pick up the quilt with 2 hands the way you might pick up a wet towel someone had left on a chair at a party you were hosting in someone else's house. She held it at arm's length. "This patchwork disaster does not go with the aesthetic. I cannot believe this was still sitting out." She said it to the room. To the 40 people holding drinks and small plates. A few of them laughed. The short, polite kind of laugh people offer when they are not sure whether something is a joke, but do not want to be the one who does not get it. Jolene folded the quilt without ceremony and carried it through the kitchen toward the garage. I heard the side door open and close. Beau stood beside me. He did not say anything. His hand found mine and held on. His eyes were red at the edges, in the way that children's eyes get red before they cry, when they have decided not to cry. He had seen everything. He was 7 years old, and he had seen everything, and he had chosen silence, which is something I did not learn how to do until I was considerably older than 7. I squeezed his hand once and let go. "Stay inside," I said. He did not. The garage was dim and smelled of cardboard and motor oil. The overhead light had burned out sometime last spring, and I had not gotten around to replacing it. I found the box near the far wall, between a stack of old linens and a lamp with a cracked shade. Jolene had written Salvation Army across the top in black marker, the handwriting neat and certain. Inside, beside paper plates and crumpled wrapping paper and a set of placemats I had never seen before, was the quilt. It was folded into a square no bigger than a sofa cushion, tucked beneath a tablecloth, as if it were packing material, as if 40 years of a woman's life stitched into fabric were something you used to keep the real donations from shifting during transport. I lifted it out. The weight of it was the same as it had always been, which surprised me somehow, as if I had expected the evening to have changed it physically. Through the wall, I could hear the party continuing. Laughter, the clink of glasses, Jolene's voice rising above the rest, with the particular clarity of a woman who has never doubted that a room should listen when she speaks. Beau appeared at the garage door. I had told him to stay inside. He had not listened. He stood in the doorway with the light behind him, and he looked at the quilt in my hands, and he walked over and placed one hand flat against the fabric without a word. Just held it there, palm open, fingers spread. The way you might touch something you were afraid was going to be taken from you again. I wrapped the quilt in my jacket and carried it to the passenger seat of my truck. Beau watched me from the garage door. I told him I would see him soon. He nodded. And the nod carried a weight that no 7-year-old should have to put into a gesture that small. I drove home without saying goodbye to anyone. I did not call Mitchell that night or the next morning. I placed the quilt back on Dorothy's chair, on the armrest where it had been for 2 years, and I went to bed. I lay in the dark for a long time with the windows open and the sound of the Savannah night coming through the screen. Crickets. A dog, somewhere on the next block. The ordinary machinery of a world that did not know anything had happened. I was not angry. That is what I kept telling myself. I was not angry. But I was aware of something I could not name yet. A shape forming in the dark, the way weather forms before you can see it. And for the first time since Dorothy passed, I had the strange, unshakable feeling that she was trying to tell me something, that she had been trying for a while, and that I had not been listening closely enough. But I should start this, the way things actually started, which was not at a party, and not in a garage. It started the way most things in my life have started. Quietly, without anyone noticing until it was too late to look away. My house sits on a narrow lot on the east side of Savannah's historic district, about 2 blocks from a church where I have attended Sunday service for longer than some of the pews have held together. It is a Victorian, though not the kind you see on postcards. The paint needs attention more often than I give it. The porch leans slightly toward the street, in a way that a structural engineer once called concerning, and that I have always called character. There is an iron fence along the front that Dorothy chose the year we moved in because she said a house without a fence was like a sentence without punctuation. You could get through it, but something important was missing. We bought the place in 1981. I was 25 years old. Dorothy was 23. And neither of us had any business signing a mortgage on anything more complicated than a mailbox. But Dorothy walked through the front door, looked up at the ceiling, looked out the back window at what was then an empty square of dirt and weeds and said, "This is where we live now." She said it the way she said most important things. Not as a question, not as a suggestion, as a fact she had identified before I caught up to it. I spent 35 years carrying mail for the United States Postal Service, walking a route through the streets of this city in heat that could melt the stamp right off an envelope. I knew every cracked sidewalk and barking dog within a 2-mile radius of our house. Dorothy used to say I had the most well-exercised legs and the least well-exercised ambition of any man she had ever met. She meant it as a compliment, I think. With Dorothy, the line between compliment and observation was never entirely clear, and she preferred it that way. She was the one who made the house what it was. I provided the structure. She provided everything else. The bookshelves in the front room were hers, filled with novels and hymnals and a collection of poetry she never admitted to owning when company was over because she thought it would make her seem impractical. The photographs on the walls were arranged by her hand, not chronologically, not by occasion, but by some system she never explained and I never questioned. If you stood in the hallway and looked carefully, you could follow the whole shape of our life together. Though the order depended on something only Dorothy understood, she taught piano. 6 students a week. Sometimes 7 if a child showed particular promise or particular stubbornness, which Dorothy considered equally worth her time. The upright sat against the east wall of the front room, where the morning light came through the window and made the keys look almost new. I would come home from my route in the afternoon and hear scales coming through the screen door, some child working through a passage with the halting concentration of a person learning to speak a new language. Dorothy sat beside them on the bench. Patient. Exact. Never raising her voice, but never letting a wrong note go past without acknowledgement. I used to joke that she taught piano for the company. She smiled when I said it. That particular smile she had when she knew something I did not, and was content to let me figure it out on my own schedule. I never asked what the smile meant. I have thought about that since. I probably should have asked. The garden was hers too. She planted gardenias along the back fence the second spring after we moved in, and within a few years they had grown thick enough to block the view of the neighbor's tool shed, which Dorothy considered a public service. The smell of them came through the kitchen window in June and July, heavy and sweet in a way that made the whole house feel like it was holding its breath. After she passed, I could not bring myself to tend them properly. They did not die. Gardenias are more stubborn than people give them credit for. But they thinned, and the blooms came less often, and the smell that used to fill the kitchen became something I had to walk outside to find. Dorothy was diagnosed with congestive heart failure on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I remember the day because it was the kind of October day Savannah does well. Warm, but not punishing. A light breeze moving through the Spanish moss on the oak out front. We sat in the car in the hospital parking lot for a while after the appointment. Not because we had nowhere to go, but because neither of us was ready to take the news inside our house yet. As long as we sat in that parking lot, the diagnosis belonged to the hospital. The moment we walked through our front door, it would belong to us. She lived for 14 months after that. I will not describe those months in detail because they were hers, and she carried them with a dignity I could not have matched and did not try to. What I will say is that she did not stop. She did not slow down in any way that was visible to anyone who did not know where to look. She taught piano until 6 weeks before the end. She tended the gardenias until she could not kneel. She sat in her chair by the window every evening with the quilt across her lap and looked out at the garden she had built from an empty square of dirt. And whatever she was thinking in those moments, she kept to herself. The chair is still there. A high-backed armchair with green upholstery that has faded in the sun to something closer to sage. Dorothy picked it out at an estate sale the same way she picked out most things that mattered. Quickly, without negotiation, and with a certainty that made disagreement feel beside the point. It sits beside the window that faces the back garden. The quilt was draped over the left armrest on the last evening she sat in it, and it has not moved from that spot since. Not because I decided it should stay, because it settled there, the way certain things do after a loss, into the place where they belong, without anyone arranging them. I did not understand what she had put into that quilt. Not then. I saw fabric and stitching, and the work of a woman who loved to make things with her hands. I saw the colors she had chosen, and the patterns she had shaped, and the way the whole thing looked, honestly, like something you would find at a church bazaar marked down to $4 because nobody had made an offer by noon. I did not know she had spent 2 winters building something far more deliberate than a blanket. I did not know she had sewn a calendar into it that no one could read unless they knew what they were looking for. And I did not know that she had hidden, in the most ordinary-looking object she could make, the single most extraordinary thing she had ever done. But I am getting ahead of myself. That part comes later. First, you need to understand the quilt. And to understand the quilt, you need to understand the woman who made it. Dorothy started the quilt in the first winter after her diagnosis. I did not know that at the time. I thought she had started it because she liked making things, and because the evenings were long. She sat in her chair with a basket of fabric beside her, her mother's scissors, and a tomato-shaped pincushion she had owned since before I met her. She worked without a pattern. I asked once if she was following a design, and she said the design was following her, and I did not ask again, because I recognized the tone. It meant she had answered my question completely, even if I did not understand the answer yet. She used fabric from her own clothing. That was what made the quilt different from any blanket a person might fold together on a winter evening. Each piece had been cut from something she wore on a day that mattered, and she told me the stories as she worked, not all at once. Across months of evenings, while I sat in the opposite chair, reading the newspaper, or pretending to. The center panel was ivory with a thread of lace along one edge that had yellowed the way old lace does after decades in a box. It was from her wedding dress. One evening I came into the room and found her cutting into it with her mother's scissors as calmly as if she were trimming a coupon. I must have made a face because she looked up and said, "It is doing more good here than it was doing in that bag, Russell." The pale blue piece came from the cotton dress she wore the day Mitchell was born. She said she had picked it because it was the most comfortable thing she owned, and she had a feeling she would need comfort that day. She was correct. Mitchell arrived 6 hours later. The dress never quite recovered, but Dorothy kept it because she said some things earned the right to be imperfect. There was a white panel with small embroidered crosses along the hem from the dress she wore to Beau's christening. The deep red piece came from our 25th wedding anniversary. We had gone to a restaurant downtown that was slightly too expensive for us, and she wore that dress with her mother's pearls. I told her she looked beautiful. She said she knew. Then she smiled. And the smile made 25 years feel like exactly enough. There were other pieces. Green cotton from a gardening apron. Navy from a church dress she wore every Easter for a decade. Flannel from a robe I gave her one Christmas that she claimed was too warm, and then wore every morning until the collar frayed. Each one placed deliberately, though the overall effect was not what most people would call beautiful. It looked handmade, in the honest way. Slightly uneven, the kind of object that announces its imperfections because it has nothing to hide. When she finished, she draped it over the armrest and ran her hand across it slowly, the way you might check a surface you had built yourself. She said, "This one stays." I asked what she meant. She looked at me with something between patience and sorrow, as if she were watching a man she loved standing 3 feet from the most important thing in the room without seeing it. "Everything that matters is in it," she said. I nodded because I thought she was speaking sentimentally. She was not. But I would not understand that. For some time. Beau was 5 the first time he noticed the quilt. He had come for a Saturday visit, and while I was making lunch, he wandered into the front room and pulled it off the chair and wrapped it around himself like a cape. By the time I came in with his sandwich, he was sitting cross-legged on the floor, with only his face showing. "This smells like Grandma's house," he said. He was right. The quilt carried something. Not perfume. Dorothy did not wear perfume. It was closer to the scent of the house itself. Gardenia and old wood, and the warmth of a room where a piano has been played regularly for decades. I did not know how to explain that to a 5-year-old, so I said nothing. And he did not seem to need an explanation. After that, the quilt became part of his visits. Every first Saturday, he came through the front door, walked past me with a wave that was more obligation than greeting, and went straight to the chair. He pulled the quilt down and settled into it before he was ready to do anything else. It was a ritual, the kind children build without being told. He started asking about the pieces. "What is this one, Grandpa?" He would point to a square, and I would tell him the story. The wedding dress, the anniversary dinner, the christening. He listened with his whole body still, and his eyes on whatever he was being told about, as if he were memorizing not just the words but the shape of the fabric that held them. One afternoon, he was running his fingers across the panels the way someone might read a map. He stopped at the centerpiece, the ivory one, the wedding dress. He pressed his palm flat against it. "This one feels different, Grandpa," he said. "Thicker." I told him it was probably just where the seams came together. He accepted that the way children accept answers from adults they trust. Completely and without suspicion. He moved on to the blue panel and asked about the day his father was born. And the afternoon continued. I did not think about what he had said. I filed it somewhere behind 100 other things a child says in a week that seem to mean nothing. And then, later, turn out to mean everything. He was right. That panel was thicker. It was thicker because something had been placed behind it and sewn into the lining with a precision that matched the surrounding stitches so closely you would never find it unless you already knew it was there. But that part comes later. What matters now is that Bo noticed. Dorothy's grandson, in Dorothy's chair, wrapped in Dorothy's quilt, found the one spot in the fabric that was not like the others. And he told me about it the plain way children tell you true things. Without weight. Without suspicion. Simply because his hands had found it, and his mouth reported it. I should have listened more carefully. I was not the first person in this family to make that mistake. Bo turned 7 in the spring, and by then the quilt had become something closer to a language between us than an object. He no longer asked me to tell him the stories behind each panel. He had memorized them. Instead, he would sit in the chair with the quilt across his lap and point to a square and tell me the story himself, checking my face to see if he had the details right. He almost always did. The blue dress his father was born in, the red dress from the anniversary dinner, the white one with the little crosses from his own christening. He recited them the way children recite things they consider important, with a seriousness that adults sometimes mistake for imitation, but is actually something much closer to inheritance. He had a habit I noticed but never mentioned. When he was sitting with the quilt, he would run his fingers along the seams the way some people run their fingers along the edge of a book they are about to open. Slowly, as if the seams themselves contained information he was not yet able to read but intended to return to. He did this without looking down. His eyes would be on the window, or on me, or on nothing in particular, but his fingers moved with a kind of quiet attention that reminded me so much of Dorothy, it occasionally stopped me in the middle of whatever I was doing. One Saturday afternoon in early summer, I was watering the gardenias through the kitchen window when I heard him talking in the front room. He was alone. I came around the corner and found him sitting in the chair with the quilt held up to his face, his nose pressed into the fabric near the green panel, the gardening apron piece. He was not talking to me. He was talking to the quilt, or to whatever the quilt represented to him, which I suspect was not a blanket at all, but a person he could no longer reach in any other way. He heard me and lowered the quilt and looked at me with an expression that was neither embarrassed nor defensive. Just open. The way children are open before they learn that certain feelings are supposed to be private. "Mom says your house smells old," he said. I did not respond immediately. Not because I was offended, but because I was trying to hear what was underneath the sentence. Children repeat things. They carry phrases home from one house and deposit them in another without understanding the weight of what they are transporting. "I like old," he said. He looked down at the quilt in his lap. "Old smells like Grandma." I stood in the doorway of my own living room, and I did not say anything back, because whatever I would have said would not have been steady enough to deserve his attention. There are moments with children when the truest thing you can do is remain quiet and let them have the space they have just created. This was one of those moments. The visits continued through that spring and into early summer, but something shifted in their shape. Jolene began answering the phone when I called to confirm the Saturday pickups. Mitchell had always handled the scheduling before, usually with a quick "see you Saturday, Dad" that required no further discussion. Now Jolene picked up on the second ring and spoke with the particular friendliness of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say. "Bo has a soccer commitment this weekend," she told me one Saturday morning. The next week it was tutoring. The week after that, Bo was tired and needed an early night, which was a curious reason to cancel a Saturday afternoon visit. I thanked her each time. I hung up. I am not entirely sure why I kept thanking her. Habit, I suppose. Or the particular politeness of a man who has not yet decided what he is dealing with. Mitchell was not part of these conversations. When I asked to speak with him, Jolene said he was in the shower, or at the store, or on a call. He was always somewhere adjacent to the phone but never holding it. I told myself this was normal. People get busy. Schedules shift. A daughter-in-law managing the family calendar was not, by itself, a cause for concern. I told myself several things during that period that turned out to be generous interpretations of a situation that did not deserve generosity. Jolene came by the house once on a Wednesday afternoon without calling ahead. She walked through the front room slowly, looking at things the way a person looks at things. They are appraising rather than admiring. She paused at the bookshelf, the one I had partially restocked after she emptied it. She paused at the piano. She paused at the quilt on the chair. "You know, Dad," she said, and I noticed she had started calling me Dad without ever having asked whether I wanted her to. "You might think about simplifying a little. Getting rid of some of the older things. It would open up the space." She said it lightly. The way people say things they mean but do not want to own yet. She meant the quilt. She might have meant other things too, but she meant the quilt specifically, because her eyes were on it when she said it, and they stayed on it a half-second longer than the rest of the room. I nodded. I said I would think about it. I made no changes whatsoever. The last Saturday Beau visited before his birthday was in mid-October. The air had just begun to turn, and the gardenias had finished blooming for the season, and the house smelled like what it smells like when the garden has gone quiet. Beau came through the door and went straight to the chair. He pulled the quilt down and wrapped himself in it and sat there for a long time without asking me anything. I made him a sandwich. He ate it in the chair. We did not talk much. Some visits were like that. The talking kind and the quiet kind. And both were equally full. When Jolene pulled up outside, she did not come to the door. She stayed in the car and tapped the horn twice. Not long honks. 2 short taps, the kind that say, "I am here and I am not getting out." Beau folded the quilt carefully, more carefully than a 7-year-old typically handles anything, and placed it back on the armrest. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. "See you at my birthday, Grandpa," he said. He walked out the front door and down the porch steps and across the yard to the car. I stood in the doorway and watched the car pull away from the curb and turn at the end of the block. The house was quiet. The chair was empty. The quilt was where he had left it, folded with the ivory panel facing up, and the cushion beneath it was still warm from where he had been sitting. I closed the door. I did not know it then, but that was the last ordinary visit we would have for a while. The next time Beau would be in this house, there would be 40 people in it, and the quilt would end up in a box in the garage. And nothing about any of it would be ordinary at all. I noticed the curtains first. I had gone to the dentist on a Thursday morning, a routine cleaning that took 45 minutes, and when I came home, the curtains in the front room were different. Dorothy had chosen the originals the year we moved in. They were a soft cream linen, with a weight to them that made them hang properly and block the afternoon sun without turning the room dark. The new ones were white and thin and let in so much light that the room looked exposed, like a house that had been undressed without its permission. I stood in the front room and looked at them for a while. Then I called Mitchell. He picked up on the 3rd ring, which was unusual because Mitchell generally answers on the 1st. "Jolene just wants to help, Dad," he said. She thought the room could use something brighter. I asked him whether he had seen the old curtains. He said he thought Jolene had taken them to be cleaned. I found them 3 days later, in a garbage bag in the garage behind the lawnmower. They had not been taken to be cleaned. They had been replaced. And the replacement had been decided, executed, and completed in the span of a 45-minute dental appointment, with a precision that suggested it had been planned well in advance of the morning I happened to leave the house. I hung the original curtains back up that evening. The next week, when I came home from the grocery store, they were gone again. The thin white ones were back. I did not call Mitchell this time. I understood the message. The curtains were not a conversation. They were a decision that had already been made by someone who did not consider my opinion part of the process. The bookshelves came next. Dorothy had filled them over 3 decades with novels, hymnals, poetry collections, and a set of encyclopedias from 1987 that she refused to part with because she said the internet could not replace the satisfaction of looking something up with your hands. One afternoon I came home and found the shelves half empty. The remaining books had been rearranged with spaces between them, the way books are arranged in photographs of rooms where no one actually reads. I found the missing volumes in cardboard boxes in the garage, labeled in Jolene's handwriting. Books storage. Not books Dad's. Not books Dorothy's. Just storage. As if the 30 years those pages had spent in this house were a temporary condition that had finally been corrected. The photographs came down gradually. Not all at once, which I think was deliberate, because removing them all at once would have been noticeable in a way that could be challenged. Instead, they disappeared in 1s and 2s over the course of several weeks. The wedding photograph from the hallway. Mitchell's school pictures from the stairwell wall. The snapshot of Dorothy and me, standing in front of the house the day we moved in. Both of us squinting in the sun, both of us younger than seems possible now. They were relocated to the back bedroom, the one no one used, arranged on the dresser in a way that technically preserved them while practically hiding them from anyone who did not go looking. In their places, Jolene had hung mirrors, and 2 abstract prints in gray and white that matched nothing in the house except the new curtains. The hallway, which had once been a chronicle of 40 years of living, now looked like a corridor in a building where no one had lived long enough to leave a mark. She told visitors the house was getting a little refresh. I heard her say it to a woman from her office who came by one afternoon. Dad's house needs a little refresh. You know how it is with older homes. She said it as if the house were the thing that was aging, and not the man inside it. As if a fresh coat of paint and some new mirrors could correct whatever she believed was wrong with the way I had been living. I said nothing about the curtains or the books or the photographs. I said nothing because I was still trying to understand the shape of what was happening, and because I have learned over 70 years that a man who speaks before he sees the full picture usually ends up arguing about the wrong thing. But I said something about the piano. She mentioned it on a Sunday after church. She had driven Mitchell and Beau to the service, which she did occasionally when she wanted to be seen at something, and afterward, she stood in my front room with her coat still on, and looked at the upright against the east wall. You know, no one really plays it anymore, she said. It takes up a lot of space. We could donate it to the church, or maybe the school. They are always looking for instruments. I looked at her. She looked back at me with the expression she wore when she was presenting something unreasonable, as if it were the most logical suggestion in the world. It stays, I said. 2 words. I did not explain. I did not say it was Dorothy's. I did not say that for 20 years the sound of children learning scales had come through that instrument every afternoon, and that the silence it held now was not empty, but full of every note that had ever been played on it. I did not say any of that because Jolene was not a person who would hear it, and I was not a man who wasted words on ears that were closed. She smiled. The small, careful smile of someone who has received an answer they did not want and has decided to come back to the question later through a different door. She did not mention the piano again, but I noticed, about a week after that conversation, that the fallboard had been closed. The wooden cover that folds down over the keys. Dorothy had always left it open because she said a piano with its keys covered looked like a mouth that had been told to stop talking. I did not remember closing it. I asked Mitchell. He did not remember closing it either. I stood in the front room that evening and looked at the piano with its fallboard shut and the thin white curtains and the half-empty bookshelves and the blank spaces on the walls where my family used to be. The room was cleaner than it had been in years. It was brighter. It was organized in a way that a magazine photographer might have appreciated. And I did not recognize a single corner of it. I was standing in my own house, the house I had built a life inside for over 40 years, and it felt like standing in a house that belonged to someone else, someone who had moved in without signing anything and was rearranging the furniture before the previous owner had finished packing. That evening Mitchell called. His voice had the slightly strained quality it took on when he was relaying something Jolene had told him to say. Jolene mentioned you might want to think about the house being a lot for one person, he said. Did she? I said. It was not a question. Mitchell was quiet. In the background, I heard Jolene say something I could not make out. Then, Mitchell said he had to go, and that he would talk to me soon. He hung up. I stood in the kitchen, holding the phone and looking through the doorway at the piano. The fallboard was still closed. The keys underneath it were silent, and the quilt on the chair beside it was the only thing in the room that was exactly where Dorothy had put it. Jolene organized Beau's 7th birthday party at my house on a Saturday evening in late October. She did not ask. She informed. The distinction is important because it tells you something about how she operated, which was by presenting decisions as facts and leaving you to find a way to disagree with a thing that had already been set in motion. I learned about it on a Wednesday when I came home from the hardware store and found her in my living room with a clipboard and a woman I had never seen before whose job, as far as I could tell, involved having opinions about napkin arrangements. Jolene looked up from the clipboard and said it made more sense to hold the party here because the yard was better for children. Her yard was twice the size of mine. I did not point this out because the clipboard woman was measuring the distance between the dining table and the wall, and I had the feeling that objecting at this stage would have been like standing in front of a parade and suggesting it go a different direction. By the time I came downstairs that Saturday evening, the house was not my house anymore. It was an event. There were rented chairs on the porch, catering trays on the kitchen counter, flowers in vases I did not own, placed on surfaces I had never thought needed flowers. Jolene had strung small lights along the hallway and removed the last of the photographs from the walls, presumably because they interfered with the lighting scheme. There were close to 40 people moving through rooms that had been rearranged to accommodate traffic patterns, and the whole thing had the smooth, slightly impersonal quality of a party thrown by someone who organized parties the way other people managed construction projects. I stood near the kitchen doorway for a while and watched. I was wearing the jacket Mitchell had given me for Christmas 2 years ago, and I had trimmed my beard that morning, and I was aware of making an effort to present myself in a way that would not give anyone a reason to use the word disheveled in a conversation later. I am not sure when I started thinking that way. Somewhere between the curtains and the photographs, probably. Jolene found me before I found anyone I recognized. She was wearing a black dress that looked expensive, in the way that expensive things do when the person wearing them wants you to notice the expense. She touched my arm, which she rarely did, and steered me toward a couple standing near the front window. "This is Mitchell's father," she said. "Not my father-in-law. Not Russell. Not even Dad," which she had recently started calling me without invitation. Mitchell's father, a descriptor that placed me one generation removed from the person who actually mattered in the introduction. The couple smiled politely. I shook the man's hand. They asked what I did. I told them I was retired. Jolene added. He was a mailman, with the slight downward inflection people use when they are contextualizing something they consider modest. Then she moved on. And the couple moved on. And I stood by the window in my own house, feeling like a piece of furniture that had been left in the room because moving it would have been more trouble than explaining it. Mitchell was near the back porch. I could see him through the kitchen doorway, standing with 2 men I did not know, holding a beer, laughing at something with the loose energy of a man who is having a good time at a party. His wife organized in his father's house using his father's electricity. He saw me and waved. The wave was friendly and brief and did not lead to a conversation. There was always someone between us at these things. I had noticed this before. I was beginning to understand it was not accidental. I went looking for Beau. I found him in the hallway, half hidden behind a cluster of adults holding small plates. He was doing what children do at adult parties. Circling, waiting for the event that was supposedly for him to include him in some meaningful way. He saw me and his face changed. Not a smile exactly. More like the expression a person makes when they spot something familiar in an unfamiliar room. He reached for my hand, and we walked together toward the front room, toward the chair by the window. The quilt was still there, draped over the armrest the way it had been for 2 years. The only thing in the room that had not been moved or replaced or improved upon. Bo looked at it the way he always looked at it. He reached out one hand toward the fabric. Before he touched it, Jolene's voice came from behind us. "Oh my God, I thought I told Mitchell to move that thing." She crossed the room in 4 steps. She moved the way she always moved at these events, with the particular momentum of a woman who has identified a problem and is on her way to correct it before anyone else has time to consider whether it is actually a problem. She picked up the quilt with both hands. Not carefully. Not the way you handle something that belongs to someone. The way you pick up a towel that someone has left on a chair you need for guests. She held it at arm's length and looked at it with an expression I have seen people make at yard sales when they pick up something they have no intention of buying. "This patchwork disaster does not go with the aesthetic," she said. She said it to the room, to the 40 people holding drinks and making conversation and pretending not to notice. I cannot believe this was still sitting out. A few people laughed. The short, uncertain kind. The kind that fills the space after someone has said something that might be cruel, but is wearing the costume of a joke. Jolene folded the quilt without ceremony. She did not fold it the way Dorothy had folded it, with the panels aligned and the ivory centerpiece facing up. She folded it the way you fold a drop cloth, corners in, then in half, then stuffed under one arm. She carried it through the kitchen. I heard the side door open, the door to the garage. I heard it close. Bo stood beside me. He had not moved since Jolene entered the room. His hand was still in the air where the quilt had been, fingers slightly open, reaching for something that was no longer there. He lowered his hand slowly and turned to look at the chair. The armrest was bare. The cushion still held the slight impression of the quilt's weight, the way a chair holds the shape of a person who has just stood up. He did not cry. His eyes were wet at the edges, but he did not cry. And I understood that he had made a decision about that, the way children sometimes make decisions about their own emotions with a discipline that shames the adults around them. He looked up at me. He did not say anything. He did not need to. I looked at the empty chair. I looked at the bare armrest where the quilt had been for 2 years. I looked at the room full of people who had watched it happen and returned to their drinks. I knew where I needed to go. The garage was dark. The overhead bulb had burned out the previous spring, and I had not replaced it, which Jolene would have cited as evidence of something if she had known about it. I stood in the doorway and let my eyes adjust. The muffled sound of the party came through the wall. Glasses. Laughter. Someone's voice rising above the rest in the middle of a story that was apparently very funny. 40 people on the other side of that wall, and not one of them had followed a 70-year-old man out of the room. The box was against the far wall. Jolene had written Salvation Army across the top in black marker, with handwriting that was neat and unhesitating. The kind of handwriting that does not second-guess itself. I opened the flaps and looked inside. Paper plates, crumpled wrapping paper. A set of placemats someone had apparently decided to part with. And beneath all of it, folded into a square and tucked against the bottom, as if it were padding, the quilt. I lifted it out. It smelled the same. Gardenia and old wood, and something underneath both of those that I had never been able to name but that Bo had identified correctly at the age of 5. Grandma. It smelled like Grandma. I heard a sound behind me and turned. Bo was standing in the doorway. The light from the kitchen framed him from behind, so that his face was mostly in shadow, but I could see his eyes, and they were fixed on the quilt in my hands with an intensity that did not belong on the face of a 7-year-old at his own birthday party. He walked over without saying anything. He placed his hand flat against the fabric, palm open, fingers spread. He held it there for several seconds. Then he looked up at me. I do not know what he saw in my face, but whatever it was seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded once, the way adults nod when they have reached an agreement, and stepped back. "See you soon, Grandpa," he said. Quietly. as if it were a promise he was making to himself as much as to me. I wrapped the quilt in my jacket and carried it to the truck. I set it on the passenger seat, the way you set something down when you want it close enough to see. I started the engine. I did not go back inside. I did not say goodbye to Jolene or Mitchell or any of the 40 people who were celebrating something in my house without me. I drove home through streets. I had walked for 35 years delivering mail, past houses where I knew every crack in the sidewalk and every dog behind every fence, and the familiarity of the route was the only thing that felt real to me that evening. I placed the quilt back on the armrest of Dorothy's chair. I stood there for a moment with my hand on the fabric, feeling the weight of it, feeling the places where the panels met and the seams ran together, feeling the centerpiece, the ivory one, the wedding dress. Bo was right. It was thicker there. I noticed it for the first time, standing in my dark living room at 9:30 on a Saturday night with the party still going on in a house across town, where my name was probably not being mentioned. I went to bed. I lay in the dark for a long time. I was not angry. I kept telling myself that. Not angry. But the word did not quite fit the shape of what I was feeling. It was closer to awareness. The slow, uncomfortable recognition that things had been happening around me in a pattern I had been too polite or too patient or too old-fashioned to name. In the days that followed, I noticed the quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of a house where one person lives. A different kind. The quiet where something used to be. Bo's visits stopped. Not officially. There was no announcement. No conversation. They simply did not happen. I called on the Wednesday before the first Saturday in November to confirm the pickup, and Jolene answered. Bo has a school project this weekend, she said. He really needs to focus. I thanked her and hung up. The following week it was a family obligation on her side. The week after that, Bo was coming down with something, and she did not want him going out in the cold. Each reason was different. Each reason was plausible, and each reason ended the same way. With me standing in my kitchen saying thank you to a woman who was removing my grandson from my life one Saturday at a time. I stopped asking to speak with Mitchell during these calls. The first 2 times I had asked, Jolene told me he was unavailable, and her tone carried the particular finality of a door being closed by someone who does not intend to open it again. Mitchell did not call me on his own. I considered calling him directly, on his cell phone. At a time I knew he would be at work and away from Jolene. I considered it several times. I did not do it. I am not sure why. Maybe I was not ready to hear whatever he would say. Maybe I was afraid he would say nothing at all. On a Tuesday morning in the second week of November, I called Bo's school. I was standing at the kitchen counter with my coffee still warm. I had a pickup scheduled for Thursday, a midweek arrangement we had kept for over a year, and I wanted to confirm it was still on the calendar. The secretary checked her records. She came back on the line with the tone people use when they are delivering information they assume you already have. My name had been removed from Bo's emergency contact list. It had also been removed from the authorized pickup list. The school had been notified by Mrs. Jennings that the changes had been made with my knowledge and agreement. I thanked the secretary. I told her I would follow up with the family. I hung up and stood at the counter without moving. The coffee was still warm. Outside the window, the neighbor was walking his dog along the fence line the way he did every morning at that hour. A cardinal was sitting on the iron fence Dorothy had chosen 40 years ago. An entirely ordinary Tuesday morning in Savannah, Georgia. I opened the kitchen drawer and found a notepad. I wrote down the date. Just the date. Nothing else. I did not yet have words for what was being done, but I had learned enough from 35 years of walking the same streets to know that when something changes in a pattern, you mark the spot. You come back to it later when you can see it clearly. I set the notepad on the table beside the salt shaker and went back to my coffee. The cardinal was still on the fence. The neighbor's dog had moved on. The morning continued, as if nothing had changed, which is the way most mornings continue when something has changed so quietly that the world has not yet noticed. I did not call Mitchell. I considered it. I stood at the kitchen counter with the phone in my hand twice that week and thought about dialing his number, but I have learned over 70 years that speaking before you understand a situation rarely improves it. You end up arguing about the symptom while the cause sits in the corner of the room watching you waste your energy. I put the phone down both times and went back to my coffee. The notepad stayed on the table with its single line. One date. One fact. I was waiting for the shape to show itself. I did not have to wait long. The envelope arrived 3 days later. It was addressed to me by full legal name, Russell David Jennings, in a typeface that suggested medical correspondence. The return address was a geriatric assessment clinic on the north side of Savannah, a place I had never visited, never contacted, and never heard mentioned by anyone I knew. Inside was a letter informing me of an upcoming appointment for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. The language was professional and neutral, the kind of language designed to sound routine even when the thing it describes is not routine at all. The appointment had been scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. I called the number on the letterhead. The woman who answered was polite and unhurried. She told me the appointment had been arranged by a concerned family member who had indicated I was aware of it and had consented. I asked who the family member was. She said she could not disclose that information, but that the referral had described several incidents of concern, including confusion while driving and difficulty managing household responsibilities. I asked for the name of the physician I was scheduled to see. She gave it to me. I had never heard it in my life. I thanked her and ended the call. I picked up the notepad from the kitchen table and wrote the doctor's name beneath the date from the school. 2 lines now. 2 things that had been arranged in my name by someone who had not asked me. I put the pen down and looked at what I had written. My own handwriting, steady and clear, recording decisions that someone else had made about my life without my knowledge. Outside the window, the neighbor's sprinkler was running along the side fence. The sound of it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I sat with that sound for a while. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do after receiving information that changes the shape of your day is to sit still and let the shape settle before you try to act on it. 4 days later, I came home from the grocery store and found that the lock on my front door had been changed. My key did not work. I stood on my own porch, holding a bag of groceries in one arm and a key that no longer opened my own house in the other, and I felt something I had not felt in all the weeks since the party. Not anger. Something quieter than anger and more dangerous. The specific, precise awareness of a man who has just been locked out of his own life by someone who left the porch light on so it would not look like what it was. I set the groceries on the porch chair and called Mitchell. He answered on the second ring. His voice had the slightly rehearsed quality it carried when Jolene had briefed him on what to say. "Jolene had the locks changed for your safety, Dad," he said. She was worried about the neighborhood. The neighborhood had not changed in 40 years. The same families. The same fences. The same dogs. Pearl Washington had lived across the street since before Dorothy and I moved in, and the most dangerous thing that had ever happened on our block was the year someone's inflatable Christmas decoration blew into the road and stopped traffic for 10 minutes. "I need a key to my own house, Mitchell," I said. There was a pause. I heard something in the background. Jolene's voice, low and indistinct. Then Mitchell said he would bring one over that evening. He did. He came alone. He handed me the key on the front porch without coming inside. He looked tired in a way that was not about sleep. I thanked him. He nodded and left. We did not discuss why a man needs to be given a key to a house he has owned for 43 years by a son who does not live in it. I went inside and locked the door behind me with the new key. I walked to the kitchen table. I picked up the notepad and wrote the 3rd line. The lock. 3 lines now. The school contact list. The cognitive evaluation I never consented to. The lock on my front door changed while I was buying milk and bread. I set the pen down and looked at the notepad. 3 lines of information written in my own handwriting about things that had been done in my name, to my life, without my knowledge or consent. Each one, taken alone, could be explained as concern. A daughter-in-law updating a contact list. A family member scheduling a medical appointment. A lock being changed for safety. Each one reasonable. Each one caring, even if you tilted your head the right way and squinted. But I had spent 35 years walking the same streets. I knew what a pattern looked like. I knew that 3 separate acts pointing in the same direction were not coincidences. They were coordinates, and the direction they pointed was toward a version of my life in which I no longer made my own decisions. I stood up from the table and walked into the front room. The piano sat against the east wall with its fallboard closed. The bookshelves were half empty. The walls held mirrors instead of memories. The thin white curtains let in too much light. Everything in the room had been changed or removed or replaced, piece by piece, so gradually that each individual change could be dismissed as minor. Everything except the quilt. It sat on the armrest of Dorothy's chair, exactly where she had placed it, exactly where I had returned it after the night in the garage. The ivory panel faced up. The stitching was uneven in the honest way that handmade things are uneven. It looked like nothing. It looked like the kind of thing a woman might leave behind because she had run out of time to do anything more significant. I had been looking at it for 2 years as something Dorothy had left behind. A keepsake. A remnant. Something a man holds on to because letting go feels like a second loss he is not prepared to manage. Standing in that kitchen with 3 lines on a notepad in front of me, I began to wonder for the first time whether it was also something she had left for me, whether there was a difference between those 2 things, and whether I had been too close to the grief to see it. I did not know yet. I only knew that Dorothy had made that quilt with her own hands over 2 winters, and that she had told me everything that matters is in it, and that she had said it with the expression she wore when she was telling me the truth and waiting for me to catch up. And I knew that someone was going to considerable trouble to make sure I would not be in a position to make my own decisions much longer. I did not call Mitchell. I did not call anyone that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the notepad in front of me and the quilt visible through the doorway and the sound of the sprinkler through the window, and I waited for the next piece of the pattern to show itself. Pearl Washington knocked on my front door that same afternoon. I had not been expecting anyone, which was the usual state of my front door in those weeks. People had stopped coming by. Whether that was coincidence or coordination, I had not yet determined. But the absence had a shape to it that I was beginning to recognize. Pearl is 75. She has lived in the house directly across the street since before Dorothy and I moved into ours, which means she has watched this block for over 4 decades from a porch chair that faces my front yard with the kind of unobstructed sightline that a surveillance professional would admire. She is not a woman who involves herself in other people's affairs without reason. In the 40-some years I have known her, I can count on one hand the number of times she has crossed that street for something other than returning a misdelivered package or borrowing a cup of sugar she did not actually need. Pearl does not borrow sugar, she buys it in bulk. The sugar was always an excuse to check on Dorothy, and both women knew it, and neither ever said so. She stood on my front step with her arms crossed loosely in front of her. Not the tight cross of a person who is angry. The loose cross of a person who has been carrying something for several days and has finally decided to set it down. She had the look people get when they have rehearsed what they are about to say 3 times and are still not entirely satisfied with the opening line. "Russell," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you respond." I invited her inside. She declined. Pearl has always preferred to conduct serious conversations on porches. She says walls make people careful, and she does not have time for careful. I leaned against the doorframe. She stayed on the step. The afternoon light came through the live oak and fell across the iron fence in long, uneven stripes. She told me that Jolene had come to see her approximately 3 weeks earlier. Jolene had knocked on Pearl's door on a weekday morning. Dressed nicely, smiling in the particular way she smiled when she wanted something, and had asked to sit on the porch for a few minutes. She said she had some concerns about me. She described herself as a worried daughter-in-law, trying to understand what support the family might need. She asked Pearl whether she had noticed anything concerning about my behavior recently. Whether I had seemed forgetful, whether I had ever appeared confused while driving, or while walking to the mailbox, whether I had repeated the same stories in the same conversation, whether I had seemed uncertain about things that should be familiar, Pearl said Jolene asked the questions slowly, one at a time, with pauses between them that were designed to give each question space to grow. As if each pause were a hole she was hoping Pearl would fill with something useful. Pearl told me she had answered every question the same way. No, she had not noticed anything. I seemed the same, as I had always seemed. She said she told Jolene directly that I walked straighter than most men half my age, and that my memory was sharper than her own, which was saying something, because Pearl once corrected a pastor's sermon by citing the chapter and verse he had misquoted from memory in front of the entire congregation. But Pearl had not stopped there. She told me Jolene had also visited Pastor Holliday at the church the same week. Jolene had asked similar questions and used similar language. She had told the pastor she was concerned about episodes. She had used the phrase appropriate care options more than once. She had asked whether the church had resources for families dealing with elderly members who were showing signs of decline. Pearl paused after she said this. She looked at me the way she had looked at me for 40 years, which was directly, without flinching, and without any interest in softening what she was about to say. That woman is not worried about you, Russell, she said. She is building a case. She came to my porch and she went to the pastor's office and she asked the same questions in the same order with the same careful voice, and every one of those questions was designed to put words in people's mouths that could be written down later and used for something. She uncrossed her arms and put her hands on her hips. Russell, you need to wake up to what is happening. I stood in the doorframe and looked at her. Pearl had known Dorothy for as long as I had. They had sat in the same pew. They had cooked for the same church dinners. They had exchanged recipes they both already knew by heart, because the exchange was never about the recipe. When Dorothy was sick, Pearl brought soup every Tuesday without being asked, and left it on the porch if no one answered the door. She never mentioned it. Dorothy never thanked her for it. They had the kind of friendship that did not require acknowledgement, because acknowledgement would have implied the possibility that the thing being acknowledged might stop. One more thing, Pearl said. She lowered her voice, not because anyone was listening, but because what she was about to say carried weight, and she wanted me to feel the weight of it. Dot was not a woman who left things to chance. You know that better than anyone. If she left something in that house for you, she had a reason. And if you have not found that reason yet, it is because you have not been looking in the right place. She held my eyes for a moment longer. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked back across the street to her house. Her screen door closed behind her with the familiar slap it had been making for 4 decades. I watched her disappear inside. Then I closed my own door and walked to the kitchen table. I picked up the notepad. I wrote 3 words beneath the 3rd line. Appropriate care options. The exact phrase Kathleen had repeated. 4 lines now. The school. The doctor. The lock. The phrase. I looked at what I had written. I looked through the doorway at the quilt on Dorothy's chair. I looked at the piano against the east wall, its fallboard still closed, its keys still silent. Pearl was right. Dorothy was not a woman who left things to chance. She was a woman who bought the right fabric and cut it with her mother's scissors and sewed each piece exactly where it needed to be. She was a woman who said, "Everything that matters is in it," while looking at me with patience and sorrow. She was a woman who taught piano to 6 children a week for reasons I had never questioned because I assumed the reasons were simple. I picked up the phone. I did not call Mitchell. I did not call Jolene. I called the repair shop on Broughton Street, the one with the brass bell above the door, and the glass display case full of things other people had decided they no longer needed. Dorothy had gone there for years. She brought fabric there to be assessed, old pieces she found at estate sales and church bazaars. The owner knew her by name. He knew her taste. He knew the way she handled things she considered worth saving. I asked him whether he knew anyone who understood quilts. Not a hobbyist, not a collector. Someone who could look at a handmade quilt and tell me what was in it that I could not see. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he knew exactly the right person. I carried the quilt into the shop on Broughton Street the next morning, wrapped in a clean bedsheet. It was a Tuesday. The air was cool for Savannah in November, and the street was quiet in the way Broughton is quiet before the tourists find it. The shop sat between a bookstore and a candle store, and it had been there longer than either of them. The front window was crowded with objects arranged without any visible system. Clocks, silverware, a porcelain dog with one ear missing, brass candlesticks, polished recently enough to suggest optimism. The bell above the door rang when I pushed it open, and the sound was so familiar it felt like a handshake. The owner's name was Gerald Hines. Somewhere past 60, thin in the way that men who work with their hands and forget to eat lunch become thin, with reading glasses permanently stationed on the end of his nose. He looked up from behind the counter where he was cleaning a mantel clock with a brush the size of a toothbrush. "Russell Jennings," he said. Not a question. He set down the brush and wiped his hands. "It has been a while." I set the quilt on the counter and told him I needed someone to look at it. Someone who knew fabric. I told him I had reason to believe there was more to this quilt than what I could see, and that I was hoping trained eyes could tell me what I was missing. Gerald unwrapped it with the deliberate care of a man who had spent decades learning that the objects people consider worthless are frequently the ones worth the most attention. He spread it across the counter and looked at it for a long time. "Dorothy made this," he said. I told him she had. He nodded as if he had already known. Gerald had known Dorothy for years. She came to his shop with fabric she wanted assessed, pieces from estate sales, sometimes just to talk about things made by hand. He understood her eye. He respected her judgment. He leaned closer, moving along the seams without touching, the way a doctor examines something before deciding where to put his hands. He stopped near the center panel, the ivory one, the wedding dress. He stayed there longer than anywhere else. "This stitching is not hobbyist work," he said. He straightened and looked at me over his glasses. "This is serious craftsmanship. The tension is consistent across every seam. The way she matched the thread to the fabric on some of these panels, that is not something you learn from a pattern book. That is something you learn from years of doing it until your hands know what your eyes cannot tell them." He looked at the quilt again. Then he said something that stopped me in the middle of the shop. "Your wife made this the way someone writes a letter they intend to be found." I did not respond immediately. The sentence needed a moment to land. A letter they intend to be found. Not a blanket. Not a keepsake. Something written with purpose, designed to be read, placed where the right person would eventually look. Gerald told me he knew someone I should see. A man named Curtis Webb, a professor at SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, who specialized in textile arts. Gerald said Curtis had the kind of eye that could read fabric the way a musicologist reads a score, hearing things in the structure that other people miss. He wrote the name and number on the back of a receipt. I called Curtis from my truck behind Broughton Street. He answered on the fourth ring, with the distracted tone of a man in the middle of something. I told him Gerald Hines had referred me, and his tone changed. Gerald's name carried weight. Curtis told me to come that afternoon. His studio was in a low brick building on a side street with no sign on the outside. Inside, it smelled of sizing paste and cotton dust, and something faintly mineral, like the air in a room that has been holding still for a long time. The space was orderly in the way. Serious workspaces are orderly. Not decoratively clean, functionally clean. Large work tables near the windows where the light was best. Tools on pegboards. Bolts of fabric on industrial shelving. No decoration, just materials and purpose. Curtis Webb was somewhere in his early 50s. Silver running through dark hair pushed back without ceremony. He had a jeweler's loop on a cord around his neck, and cotton dust worked into the creases of his hands in a way that suggested it had been there for decades and had been accepted as permanent. He shook my hand and looked at the quilt before he looked at me. I took that as a professional compliment to the object. We spread it flat on the largest work table near the window. Curtis handled the edges with the instinct of someone who has handled thousands of textiles and knows where to hold and where to let the weight do the work. He positioned it in the light and stepped back and looked at it the way you look at something you are meeting for the first time but suspect you will know for a long time. He put the loop to his eye and leaned in. He began at the upper left corner and moved slowly, systematically, along each seam and panel. He paused at points that interested him. He moved past points that did not. Several minutes passed without him saying anything. I stood back. I put my hands in my pockets. I let him work. I have learned in 70 years that silence, from someone who knows what they are doing, is not something you interrupt. It is something you protect. The way you protect a flame in wind, because whatever is forming in that silence is more valuable than anything you could say to fill it. Curtis continued along the quilt. His loop moved over the fabric with the slow precision of someone reading a document in a language only a handful of people speak. He reached the center panel. The ivory one, the wedding dress. He stopped. He adjusted the loop. He stayed there for a long time. Then he straightened and looked at me across the table. "Mr. Jennings," he said, "I need you to tell me everything you know about who made this and why." I told him about Dorothy. I told him about the fabric and where it came from, the dresses and the occasions they belonged to. I told him about the 2 winters she spent making it after her diagnosis, and about the chair by the window, and about the way she had said everything that matters is in it, while looking at me with an expression I had been remembering incorrectly for 2 years. I had remembered it as sentiment. Standing in Curtis Webb's studio, I was beginning to understand it might have been instruction. Curtis listened without interrupting. He stood on the opposite side of the table, with his hands resting on the edge and his eyes on the quilt while I spoke. When I finished, he nodded once and returned to work. He began again at the upper left corner, but this time he moved differently, slower. He was no longer surveying. He was reading. He adjusted a desk lamp and angled it across the surface at a shallow grade so that the light moved along the fabric the way afternoon sun moves along a wall, catching every texture and shadow. He used the loop. He used a magnifying glass on a weighted stand. At one point he took out a small ultraviolet penlight and passed it over a seam so slowly I thought he had stopped. Then he straightened and turned to me with an expression that had changed from professional interest to something closer to recognition. "Mr. Jennings," he said, "did your wife ever mention sewing dates into this quilt?" I told him she had not. He motioned me closer. He pointed to the upper left panel, a square of green cotton from Dorothy's gardening apron. Along the lower edge, so close to the seam that it disappeared into the stitching unless you were looking for it specifically, was a series of small embroidered characters, numbers, and dashes. A date, sewn in thread that matched the green of the fabric so precisely that it was, for all practical purposes, invisible. Curtis moved to the next panel. Another date. Same technique. Thread matched to fabric, stitched along the seam line, hidden in plain sight. He moved through the quilt methodically, reading each date aloud as he found it. The first was our wedding day, June 14th, 1981. I heard the date spoken in Curtis's careful voice, and the studio fell away for a moment, and I was standing in a church in Savannah in a suit that did not fit properly, watching Dorothy come down the aisle in the dress that was now a panel in the center of this quilt, and she was smiling at me the way she smiled when she had already decided something and was waiting for me to understand what it was. The second was Mitchell's birthday, March 9th, 1984. The pale blue cotton. The third was Beau's christening, November 2nd, 2017. The white panel with the embroidered crosses. The fourth was our 25th anniversary, June 14th, 2006. The deep red. There were others. Dates I recognized and dates I did not, scattered across the quilt in a system that only Dorothy could have designed. Each one, invisible, unless you knew where to look and what looking meant. Curtis read them without commentary. He did not need to explain what they meant. Each date was a chapter in a life, stitched into fabric, with a precision that was not decorative. It was archival. Curtis returned to the center panel. The ivory one. The wedding dress. He had been circling back to it since the beginning of his examination, and now he stood over it with the loop in one eye, and his hand hovering above the fabric the way a surgeon's hand hovers above an incision site before making the first cut. The lining behind this panel is not consistent with the rest of the quilt, he said. The other panels have a single layer of cotton batting between the front and the backing. This one has something additional. The thickness is different. The weight is different. He looked at me. There is something behind this panel. Mr. Jennings. Sewn into the lining. Sealed. He asked my permission before he touched it further. I gave it. He selected a fine-tipped seam ripper from a tool roll on the table and worked along the edge of the panel with a care that made his hands look like they were moving in slow motion. He did not cut through Dorothy's stitching. He separated it, following the thread path, preserving each stitch as he opened the seam, the way you might open an envelope you intended to reseal. Inside the lining, flat against the backing, was a small pouch made of waterproof material, the kind used to protect documents from moisture and age. It had been sewn into position with stitches that matched the surrounding construction so precisely that no one examining the quilt from the outside would have detected it. Not without knowing it was there. Not without looking for it with the specific intention of finding something hidden. Curtis removed the pouch and opened it on the table. Inside was a single document, folded twice, printed on heavy paper. He unfolded it and read it without expression. Then he set it flat on the table and was quiet for a moment in a way that was different from his working silence. This silence had weight. Mr. Jennings, he said, this is a property deed. It is for 12 acres of land along the Ogeechee River, approximately 40 minutes outside Savannah. The deed is registered in the name of Dorothy Ann Jennings. He paused. He looked at me across the table. Based on current land values in that corridor, this property is worth somewhere in the range of $450,000 to $475,000. I sat down. There was a stool behind me near the wall, and I found it without looking, which was fortunate because I was not capable of looking for anything at that moment. I sat on that stool in Curtis Webb's studio, with the afternoon light coming through the window, and the quilt spread open on the table and a piece of paper in the center of it that said my wife had owned 12 acres of riverfront land that I had never known about. Curtis poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher on the counter. He set one in front of me. We stood on opposite sides of the table for a while, without speaking. The quilt lay between us with its seams open and its secret exposed, and the dates still visible along the edges of the fabric, a hidden calendar marking every moment Dorothy had considered worth remembering. Whoever made this, Curtis said finally, did not just make a quilt. They made a plan. I drank the water. I set the glass down. I looked at the deed and the quilt and the dates, stitched into fabric and thread that no one would ever see unless they were told where to look. And I thought about Dorothy sitting in her chair by the window, with her mother's scissors and her tomato pincushion, working every evening for 2 winters on something I thought was a blanket. I needed to go home. I needed to find the hymnal. I drove home from Curtis's studio with the deed sealed inside a gallon-size freezer bag on the passenger seat. The quilt, refolded along its original creases, sat in my lap at every red light because I could not stand the thought of it riding alone in the back. By the time I turned onto our street, the sun had dropped behind the live oaks, and the house looked the way it always looked at dusk, tall, patient, waiting for someone to switch on the porch light. I carried the quilt inside first, then the deed. I set the bag on the kitchen table next to the notepad. 4 lines now. School contact. Clinic letter. Lock change. Appropriate care options. I added a 5th. Deed 12 acres. Ogeechee River. Dorothy Ann Jennings. The handwriting was steadier than the others. I suppose certainty does that. I made coffee, sat in Dorothy's chair with the quilt across my knees, and tried to think the way she would have thought. Dorothy never hid one thing. She hid systems. If the quilt held a deed, there was a second piece somewhere. An explanation. A set of instructions. A reason written in her own hand. She would not have trusted me to guess. The house was quiet. I looked at the piano. Its fallboard was still closed the way Jolene had left it weeks ago. I had not reopened it. I am not sure why. Maybe because the silence felt like evidence I was not ready to disturb. I stood and walked to the bookshelf beside the piano, the one Jolene had half emptied into garage boxes. Some titles remained. A Savannah History. 2 hymnals from First African Baptist. A pocket dictionary Dorothy kept for crossword puzzles. I pulled the first hymnal. It was the older one, burgundy cover. Gold cross on the spine. Pages soft as cloth. Dorothy had carried it every Sunday for more than 30 years. The binding cracked when I opened it, the way old spines do when they remember being held. Nothing on the first pages. Nothing tucked behind Amazing Grace or Blessed Assurance. I turned past the index, past the blank end papers, and found it a single sheet of cream stationery folded twice, pressed flat between the back cover and the last page. The crease was sharp. She had placed it there with intention. I unfolded it at the kitchen table under the ceiling light. Her handwriting, small and precise, filled both sides. Russell, if you are reading this, I did not have time to tell you out loud. I am sorry for that. I wanted to, but every time I sat across from you at this table, the words felt too heavy for an ordinary Tuesday. The land is real. 12 acres on the east bank of the Ogeechee, lot 7,744, purchased from Harold Gaines in 2013 for $54,000. I paid with piano lesson savings 18 years of Thursday and Saturday afternoons. I never told you because I never told anyone. Harold agreed to keep the sale quiet. The county records are public, but nobody looks unless they know to look. I bought the land because I watched what happened to Louise Barker and to Mr. Oda on Habersham Street. Their families decided for them. Their houses were sold while they were still sitting in the living rooms. I will not let that happen to you. The deed is in the quilt. You will find it if someone helps you look carefully. I chose the wedding panel because that is where we started, and I wanted the answer to be there. If the land has grown in value, sell it. Use the money to keep the house exactly the way you want it. Fix the porch rail. Tune the piano. And if Beau ever asks about me, let him sit at the keys and show him the CI major scale. I taught every first-time student. That is enough. One more thing. I asked Maylin Torres to hold a copy of the deed in her office. She is on Drayton Street, above the old church vestry. If someone tries to take the house or take your right to decide, Mayo Lynn will know what to do. I told her everything. You were a good husband, Russell. You carried every bag of mulch for the gardenias without being asked. That is not a small thing. I read the letter 3 times. The coffee went cold. The kitchen light buzzed the way it always does after 9 o'clock. A faint electrical hum, Dorothy used to say, sounded like the house breathing. She had planned for 18 years. Not the illness. She could not have known about that. She planned for the ordinary cruelty that old age invites. The moment when someone younger decides you are no longer fit to hold your own keys. She watched it happen to neighbors, calculated the cost, and spent 2 decades teaching children piano scales to build a wall around me. The gardenias, the quilt, the hymnal, the land, the lawyer. Each one a separate stitch in the same pattern. I had lived inside her design for years without seeing its shape. I folded the letter along its original creases and placed it back inside the hymnal. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number she had written at the bottom of the page. It rang twice. Torres Law. Drayton Street office. My name is Russell Jennings, I said. My wife Dorothy told me to call you. There was a pause on the other end. Not confusion, recognition. Mr. Jennings, the woman said. I have been expecting this call. Not the timing, but the call itself. Can you come in tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock? I can. Bring everything your wife left you. Every piece of paper, every note. And Mr. Jennings bring the quilt. I hung up, looked at the notepad with its 5 lines, and turned to a clean page. At the top I wrote, Mayo Lynn Torres, Drayton Street, 9 a.m. For the first time in weeks, the next step was not something being done to me. It was something I had chosen. The building on Drayton Street had been a church once. You could tell by the windows, tall, narrow, arched at the top. The kind designed to hold stained glass that was removed decades ago and replaced with plain panes. The brick was old Savannah gray, darker near the foundation where rainwater had stained it over the years. A small brass plate beside the entrance read, Torres Law, 2nd floor. I arrived 12 minutes early. The quilt was folded inside a canvas bag I used to carry library books. The hymnal was in my jacket pocket. The deed, still in its freezer bag, sat flat against my chest inside a manila envelope. I had not slept well, but I had slept the first unbroken night in weeks. The staircase was narrow, wooden, and creaked on every 3rd step. At the top, a glass door opened into a single large room with exposed ceiling beams and wide plank floors. 2 desks, one near the window and one against the far wall. Filing cabinets lined the left side. A small table held a coffee maker, 3 mugs, and a box of sugar packets. The room smelled like old wood and paper, not unpleasant, just honest. Maylin Torres stood from the window desk when I entered. She was shorter than I expected. Mid-dock 50s, dark hair pinned back, reading glasses pushed to the top of her head. She wore a gray jacket over a white blouse, no jewelry except a thin silver watch. Her handshake was firm and brief. Mr. Jennings, sit down, please. She gestured to a wooden chair across from her desk. I sat, placed the canvas bag on the floor beside me, and set the manila envelope on her desk. Before we start, she said, I want you to know what Dorothy told me. She opened a drawer and removed a thin folder. Your wife came to this office in September 2019. She brought a copy of the property deed, a letter of intent, and a list of concerns. She asked me to hold these documents and to act on her behalf if you ever contacted me. She paid a retainer that covers initial consultation and case preparation. She paused to let that settle. Dorothy said, and I wrote this down because she asked me to, Russell will not call unless something has already gone wrong. When he calls, believe everything he tells you. I looked at the folder on her desk. The tab was labeled Jennings. D. Contingency. The paper inside was slightly yellowed at the edges. 6 years in a drawer. Waiting. Tell me what has happened, Maylin said. Start wherever feels right. I started with the curtains. It seemed small, but Maylin wrote it down without expression. I moved to the bookshelves, the photographs, the piano fallboard. She wrote. I told her about the school contact list, the clinic letter, the lock change. She stopped writing and looked up. Who changed the lock? Jolene arranged it. Mitchell brought the key. Did you authorize it? No. She wrote again. Underlined something twice. I continued the birthday party, the quilt in the Salvation Army box, Beau's visits cut to nothing. Pearl's warning about the phrase, appropriate care options. Maylin set her pen down when I said those 3 words. That phrase has legal weight, Mr. Jennings. It appears in guardianship petitions filed under Georgia Code. It is not casual language. Someone coached her, or she has done research. She asked if I had documentation. I showed her the notepad, 5 lines, each dated. She examined it and nodded. Handwritten, contemporaneous, dated. This is useful. She set it beside the folder. Now show me what Dorothy left you. I opened the canvas bag and lifted the quilt onto her desk. Then the deed in its freezer bag. Then the hymnal, with the letter still folded inside. Maylin read Dorothy's letter slowly. Twice. The same way I had. When she finished, she removed her glasses and set them on the desk. Your wife understood exactly what she was protecting you from, she said. This letter, combined with the deed and the quilt, establishes a clear chain of intent. Dorothy anticipated interference with your autonomy and created a documented response years in advance. She opened her laptop. I need to verify a few things. The property record, the deed registration, and your current legal standing power of attorney. Any existing guardianship filings. Do you know if anyone has filed anything on your behalf? I do not know. I will check today. She typed for a moment. Mr. Jennings, I also want to request something. There is a cognitive evaluation that was scheduled for you, the clinic letter. I would like you to take that evaluation, but at a provider I select, not the one Jolene arranged. A full neuropsychological assessment by a board-certified specialist. If the results confirm what I expect them to confirm, any guardianship petition becomes nearly impossible to sustain. You expect them to confirm I am competent. I expect them to confirm you are a 70-year-old man who drove across town with organized documents, recalled dates without notes, and presented a coherent 6-month timeline without contradiction. Yes. She closed the laptop. One more thing. I am going to request access to any communications between Jolene and third parties' medical providers, the school, any legal consultants she may have contacted. If she has been building a case, there will be a trail. There is always a trail. I looked at the quilt spread across her desk, the hymnal beside it, the notepad with its 5 careful lines. Every piece Dorothy had planted was now in the hands of someone who knew what to do with it. How long will this take? I asked. 2 weeks for the cognitive evaluation and records, maybe 3 for the communications request. I will call you when I have the full picture. She paused. Then we will schedule a meeting. Everyone at one table. I picked up the canvas bag, now empty. At the door, I turned back. She really came here 6 years ago? Maylin nodded. She sat in the same chair you are sitting in. She said you would probably ask that question. I walked down the creaking staircase and into the Savannah morning. The air smelled like rain and river mud. I had carried everything Dorothy left me into that room. And for the first time, every piece was exactly where it was supposed to be. Maylin called on a Thursday, 17 days after our first meeting. I was watering the gardenias. The phone buzzed in my shirt pocket, and I answered with wet hands. Mr. Jennings, I have the full picture. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Same time, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. And Mr. Jennings, you will want to sit down when you get here. I set the watering can on the porch rail and stood there for a moment. The gardenias were blooming late this year. Dorothy would have said they were waiting for permission. Friday morning, I walked into the Drayton Street office and found Maylin standing beside her desk, with 3 folders arranged side by side, not stacked, placed deliberately, evenly spaced, each one a different color. Blue, red, manila. She gestured to the chair and I sat. Let me start with the good news, she said. Your cognitive evaluation came back on Tuesday. Dr. Anand, board-certified neuropsychologist, 22 years in practice, administered a full battery. Memory, reasoning, executive function, language, orientation. She opened the blue folder and turned it so I could read the summary page. You scored in the normal A high range across every category. His concluding statement says, and I quote, Mr. Jennings demonstrates cognitive function consistent with a healthy, independent adult. There is no clinical basis for supervised care or guardianship consideration. She let me read it twice. I did not need to, but I read it twice anyway. There is something about seeing your own mind declared sound on paper that makes you realize how close someone came to taking it from you. Now the difficult part. She closed the blue folder and moved to the red one. I submitted formal discovery requests to 3 parties: the geriatric clinic that sent your evaluation letter, Bowes School, and a family law attorney named David Kirkner on Abercorn Street. Kirkner's office confirmed that Jolene Jennings retained his services in March of this year to explore guardianship options for a family member. She did not name you in the initial consultation, but the description matches 70-year-old widower, sole homeowner, adult son as next of kin. Maylin opened the red folder. Inside were printed emails, 12 pages, paper clipped in chronological order. She turned them toward me, one set at a time. These are communications recovered through the discovery process. The first set is between Jolene and the geriatric clinic. She scheduled the cognitive evaluation without your knowledge and listed herself as the referring family contact. She described you as Maylin read from the page, increasingly confused, forgetting appointments, leaving the stove on, and unable to manage household tasks. None of these claims appear in any medical record, and your primary care physician confirmed no cognitive concerns at your last annual physical. She moved to the second set. These are between Jolene and Bowes School. She requested removal of your name from the emergency contact list and the authorized to pickup list. The reason she gave was another glance at the page. Grandfather's declining mental state makes unsupervised contact inadvisable at this time. The school complied because she is listed as a legal baron. The third set was shorter. 2 emails to David Kirkner and 1 reply. Jolene described a pattern of forgetfulness, an inability to maintain the home. And this was the phrase that stopped me: emotional instability following spousal loss. She wrote that Mitchell supported the guardianship petition but wanted it handled quietly. Did Mitchell know about these emails? I asked. I do not have evidence that he read them. His name appears only in Jolene's description. He is not copied on any message. Maylin paused. That does not mean he was unaware. It means she was careful. She closed the red folder and placed her hand on the manila one. This is the financial piece. I requested a credit report and public debt filing for Jolene and Mitchell Jennings, jointly and individually. She opened it. Jolene carries $95,400 in outstanding debt across 4 credit accounts and 1 personal loan. The largest single charge is $23,000 to an event planning company in Atlanta. Same company that catered Beau's birthday party at your house. Second largest is $18,600 to a home renovation contractor. The renovation she performed on your home. I stared at the number. $23,000 for a 7-year-old's birthday party. $18,000 to replace my curtains and rearrange my shelves. Your home, Mr. Jennings, is valued at approximately $610,000 based on current Savannah Historic District assessments. If a guardianship were granted and you were declared unable to manage your affairs, a court-appointed guardian, likely Mitchell, with Jolene as effective decision-maker, could petition to sell the property to cover care costs. That would resolve their debt, and then some. She let the silence fill the room. I looked at the 3 folders. Blue. My mind. Confirmed sound. Red. The lies, told to take it from me. Manila. The reason behind the lies. What happens now? I asked. Now we bring everyone to one table. You, Mitchell, Jolene, myself, and Curtis Webb, as an expert witness for the quilt and the deed. I will present the cognitive evaluation, the emails, and the financial records. Jolene will have a choice: withdraw all guardianship efforts and restore your full access to Beau, or face a formal elder use complaint filed with the Chatham County District Attorney. When? I have already sent the letter. Next Friday, 2 o'clock, in this office. She looked at me. You do not need to say a word during that meeting, Mr. Jennings. The documents will speak. But if you want to say something, I will not stop you. I nodded. I looked at the 3 folders on her desk. Blue, red, manila, lined up like chapters of a story someone had written about my life without asking me. The difference now was that I had read every page. "I will be here at 1:30, I said. "Good." Mayo Lynn stacked the folders and placed them inside a larger binder. She wrote Jennings' meeting materials on the spine in black marker. Then she set it on the corner of her desk, exactly where the quilt had been 17 days before. I walked downstairs and onto Drayton Street. The oaks were heavy with Spanish moss, and the sidewalk was cracked in the same places it had been cracked for 40 years. Nothing about the street had changed. But I was carrying something different now, not grief, not confusion, not the slow weight of someone else's decisions. I was carrying evidence, and next Friday, every piece of it would be on the table. I arrived at the Drayton Street office at 1:28. Maylin was already there, standing beside the long table she had moved to the center of the room. It was not her desk, it was wider, older. The kind of table that belonged in a church fellowship hall. She had placed 6 chairs around it, 3 on each side. The binder marked Jennings' meeting materials sat at the head, closed, next to a glass of water. The quilt was there too, folded neatly on a side table against the wall, covered with a clean white cloth. I would not have noticed it if I had not known to look. That was intentional. "How are you feeling?" Maylin asked. "Like I have been waiting for this since the day she changed my curtains." Maylin almost smiled. She adjusted one of the chairs by an inch and checked her watch. "Curtis will arrive at 1:45. Mitchell and Jolene were informed to be here at 2. I sent the letter by certified mail and email. Both were received." "Did they respond?" Mitchell replied. "One line. 'We will be there.' I do not know if that means both of them, but I expect Jolene will not allow Mitchell to come alone." At 1:45, Curtis Webb walked in carrying a leather portfolio under his arm. He wore a pressed shirt and dark trousers, different from the dusty studio clothes I had seen before. He shook my hand, nodded to Maylin, and took the chair to my left. He placed his portfolio on the table and said nothing. He understood this was not a conversation. It was a presentation. At 2 o'clock the staircase creaked, 2 sets of footsteps, one heavier than the other. Mitchell appeared first. He wore a blue dress shirt, with the top button undone, and his hands were in his pockets. He looked at me for a full second before looking away. Behind him, Jolene entered in a cream blazer, hair pulled back, a leather handbag on her shoulder. She scanned the room the way someone scans a restaurant counting exits, evaluating the audience. "Please sit," Mayo-Lin said. She gestured to the 3 chairs on the opposite side of the table. Mitchell sat in the middle. Jolene took the chair to his right, closest to the door. The 3rd chair remained empty. Mayo-Lin stayed standing. She placed both hands flat on the table. "Thank you for coming. I will be direct about the purpose of this meeting. I represent Russell Jennings in matters concerning his legal autonomy, his property rights, and his relationship with his grandson. Over the past 3 weeks, my office has conducted a review of actions taken by members of this family that directly affect Mr. Jennings's independence and welfare. I am going to share what we found. I ask that you listen fully before responding." Jolene crossed her arms. Mitchell stared at the table. Mayo-Lin opened the binder to the first section, the blue folder, and removed the cognitive evaluation. She placed it flat on the table and turned it so both Mitchell and Jolene could read the header. "This is a full neuropsychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Priya Anand, board-certified, 22 years in practice. Mr. Jennings completed the battery 10 days ago. The results confirm normalato high cognitive function in every measured category: memory, reasoning, executive function, language, orientation." She read the final line aloud. "There is no clinical basis for supervised care or guardianship consideration." She let the paper sit. Jolene did not look at it. Mayo-Lin turned to the red folder. She removed the first set of printed emails and placed them in a row across the center of the table, 3 pages visible at once. "These are communications between Jolene Jennings and Savannah Geriatric Wellness Center. In these emails, Mrs. Jennings scheduled a cognitive evaluation for Mr. Jennings without his knowledge or consent. She described him as Mao Lin pointed to a highlighted passage. Increasingly confused, forgetting appointments, leaving the stove on, and unable to manage household tasks. Mr. Jennings's primary care physician has no record of any such concerns. The clinic accepted the referral based solely on these descriptions. Mitchell leaned forward. He was reading the highlighted lines. His jaw tightened. Mao Lin placed the second set on the table. These are between Jolene Jennings and the administration at Bo's school. She requested removal of Mr. Jennings from the emergency contact and authorized pickup lists. The stated reason was, she read again, grandfather's declining mental state makes unsupervised contact inadvisable. The school complied because Mrs. Jennings is a listed legal parent. Mitchell turned his head toward Jolene. She did not look back. Her eyes were fixed on the papers, but her face was still. Mao Lin placed the third set. 2 emails to David Kirkner and 1 reply. These are between Jolene Jennings and a family law attorney on Abercorn Street. She inquired about guardianship options for, and I will use her exact words, a 70-year-old widower exhibiting emotional instability following spousal loss. She stated that Mitchell supported the petition and wanted it handled quietly. Mitchell's voice came low and flat. I never said that. Jolene shifted in her chair. For the first time since sitting down, her posture changed. The crossed arms unfolded. One hand moved to the edge of the table, fingers pressing against the wood. Mao Lin did not pause. She opened the manila folder and placed a single printed page at the center of the table, the credit summary. This is a joint and individual debt profile for Mitchell and Jolene Jennings. Total outstanding, $95,400. The largest entries include $23,000 to an event planning company for the birthday party held at Mr. Jennings's home, and $18,600 to a renovation contractor for modifications made to Mr. Jennings's property without his authorization. The room was very quiet. I could hear the oak branches brushing against the arched windows. I could hear Mitchell breathing. Mao Lin closed the manila folder and placed all 3 blue-red manila side by side in the center of the table. She looked at Jolene. Mrs. Jennings, the picture these documents create is clear. What has not yet been presented is the reason this meeting is happening at all. She turned toward the side table, toward the white cloth and what it covered. Mr. Webb, whenever you are ready. Curtis stood, and every pair of eyes in the room followed him. Curtis walked to the side table and removed the white cloth. The quilt lay beneath it, folded the way Dorothy always folded it, edges aligned, the wedding dress panel facing up. He carried it to the center of the long table and spread it open, slowly, the way someone opens a map they have studied for weeks. No one spoke. The quilt covered most of the table surface. Under the overhead light, every stitch was visible: the cream lace from the wedding dress, the pale blue cotton from Mitchell's christening gown, the white embroidered cross from Bo's baptism robe, the deep red silk from the 25th anniversary dinner. The colors had softened with age, but the pattern was deliberate. Even Jolene looked at it. Curtis placed his hands at the edges, palms flat, and spoke for the first time. My name is Curtis Webb. I am a professor of textile arts at the Savannah College of Art and Design. I have examined this quilt over the course of 3 sessions, totaling approximately 9 hours. He traced a seam with his index finger. The stitching throughout this piece is not decorative. It is structural and intentional. Along every major seam, the maker Dorothy Jennings embedded a series of dates using thread matched precisely to the fabric color. These dates are invisible unless examined under magnification. He pointed to specific seams as he spoke. The 14th of June 1981 wedding date. The 9th of March 1984, birth of Mitchell Jennings. The 2nd of November 2017, christening of Bo Jennings. The 14th of June 2006 25th wedding anniversary. There are additional dates corresponding to events I have not yet identified. Each one is stitched in a consistent hand with consistent tension. This is not folk art. This is archival documentation sewn into fabric. Mitchell was staring at the quilt. His lips were pressed together and his hands were flat on his knees under the table. I could see his knuckles from where I sat. Curtis moved to the center panel, the wedding dress lace. This panel has a double lining. The outer layer is the original lace. Beneath it, Mrs. Jennings sewed a waterproof polyethylene pouch, sealed along 3 sides with a heat press. Inside that pouch I found this. He opened his portfolio and removed a clear protective sleeve. Inside was the deed, the same deed I had first seen in his studio. He placed it on the table beside the quilt. This is a property deed for 12 acres of land on the east bank of the Ogeechee River, lot 7,744, Chatham County, Georgia. The deed is registered to Dorothy Ann Jennings. It was purchased in 2013 from Harold Gaines for $54,000. Based on current comparable land sales along the Ogeechee corridor, this property is valued between $450,000 and $475,000. The number settled into the room like something heavy placed on glass. Jolene's hand, which had been resting on the table edge, withdrew to her lap. Maya Lynn spoke next. The deed has been verified through the Chatham County Recorder's Office. The property is free of liens. As the surviving spouse and sole beneficiary under Georgia intestacy law, Mr. Beneficiary under Georgia intestacy law, Jennings is the rightful owner of this land. There is no ambiguity. She paused and turned to face Jolene directly. Mrs. Jennings, I want to be clear about what these documents represent when viewed together. Your father-in-law is cognitively sound. He is the legal owner of a home valued at $610,000 and a parcel of land worth approximately $475,000. Over the past 6 months, you have systematically attempted to undermine his autonomy, fabricating cognitive decline, removing his access to his grandson, changing locks on his own home, and consulting an attorney about guardianship. You carry $95,400 in personal debt, a significant portion of which was incurred through modifications to his property and events held in his home without his consent. Jolene opened her mouth. No words came. She closed it and looked at Mitchell. Mitchell did not look back. He was still staring at the quilt, at the panel made from his own christening gown, the pale blue cotton his mother had saved for 40 years and sewn into the center of her last work. Malin continued. You have 2 options. The first, you withdraw all guardianship inquiries immediately. Restore Mr. Jennings' name to all school contact lists, return full and unrestricted access to Bo, and sign a written agreement acknowledging Mr. Jennings's legal competence and independent status. If you choose this, today's meeting remains private. She placed a single sheet of paper on the table, the agreement, already printed, 2 signature lines at the bottom. The second option, I file a formal elder abuse complaint with the Chatham County District Attorney's Office on Monday morning. The emails, the clinic referral, the school records, the lock change, and the financial profile will be included in that filing. Georgia Code Section 3518 defines the exploitation of a disabled adult or elder person. You do not want to be on the receiving end of that statute. The silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. I counted them because counting was the only thing that kept me in my chair. Jolene stood, her chair pushed back against the old plank floor with a sound like a drawer closing. She picked up her handbag, looked at the agreement on the table, looked at the quilt, and looked at me. For one moment, her expression was not anger or shame. It was calculation, the rapid math of someone measuring what is left. Then she walked to the door and down the staircase. We heard every creaking step until the street door opened and closed. Mitchell had not moved. His eyes were wet. He was looking at the blue fabric, his christening gown, cut and stitched by his mother's hands into something that had just saved his father's life. Dad, he said. His voice broke on the word. I did not know about the emails. I looked at my son. He was 52 years old, and he looked the way he looked at 9, standing in the kitchen doorway after breaking the porch rail spindle with a baseball, waiting to find out if he was still loved. I know, I said. Maya Lynn quietly gathered the 3 folders and placed them back in the binder. Curtis covered the quilt with the white cloth. The agreement remained unsigned on the table, but Jolene's chair was empty, and everyone in the room understood what that meant. Jolene signed the agreement 4 days later. Not in Machelin's office, she would not return there. Machelin sent a courier to the house on Victory Drive. The signed copy arrived by registered mail the following morning. Both pages initialed. Both signature lines filled. No note attached. No phone call. Just paper and ink, which was enough. Within a week, my name was back on Beau's school contact list. I received a call from the front office confirming my status as an authorized pickup. The woman on the phone said, "We're glad to have you back, Mr. Jennings." She did not know what those words meant. I thanked her and hung up. Mitchell came by the house on a Sunday. He stood on the porch the way he used to stand when he was a teenager coming home past curfew. Shoulders low, hands visible, waiting for the door to open. I opened it. He sat in the kitchen and drank coffee and did not explain anything, because there was nothing to explain that I did not already understand. A man can love his wife and lose his way inside that love. I had watched it happen in slow motion for 2 years. What mattered now was that he was sitting in my kitchen, drinking from the same blue mug Dorothy bought at a yard sale in 1997, and neither of us was pretending. He told me, quietly, that Jolene had filed for divorce the previous Wednesday. She had taken an apartment on the south side. Beau would stay with Mitchell in the house on Victory Drive. Shared custody was being arranged, but Mitchell said, and I believed him, that Beau would be with me whenever he wanted to be. The land sold in August. Mylene handled the listing through a commercial broker who specialized in riverfront property along the Ogeechee. 3 offers came within the first 2 weeks. The final sale closed at $460,000, slightly below Curtis's high estimate, but more than 8 times what Dorothy paid in 2013. I sat at Mayolin's desk and signed the closing documents with a pen she lent me. A heavy, silver thing that felt like it belonged to someone important. She said I could keep it. He left it on her desk. I divided the money the way I believe Dorothy would have wanted, though she never told me exactly how. She trusted me to know, and after 41 years I think I did. The first portion went to the house. I hired a contractor, not the one Jolene had used to restore what had been changed. The original cream curtains were gone, so I found a fabric shop on Bull Street and ordered new ones in the same weight and color. The bookshelves were refilled. The photographs went back on the walls. Every nail hole matched. The piano was tuned for the first time in 3 years. When the tuner lifted the fallboard and played a CA major scale to test the action, I had to leave the room for a moment. That was Dorothy's scale. Every first student. Every Thursday afternoon. The sound had not changed. The second portion became a trust. Maya Lynn set it up, the Dorothy Jennings Music Scholarship, administered through First African Baptist Church, Pastor Holliday presiding. It would fund piano lessons for children in the historic district whose families could not afford them. 6 students per year, the same number Dorothy once taught at the kitchen upright. The first student enrolled in October, a 9-year-old girl named Abigail, who had never touched a piano before. Pastor Holliday told me she practiced every day after school in the church fellowship hall. I did not visit. Some things grow better without being watched. The third portion, the smallest, but the one that took the longest to decide, went to a playground, a real one, with swings and a climbing structure and a rubber surface, so no child splits a knee on concrete. It was built on a 1/4-acre lot 2 blocks from Beau's school. The city approved the permit in November. A small plaque near the entrance reads, "For Beau, from Grandma Dot. Play loud." Beau asked me once, a few months after the meeting, what the quilt was really for. We were sitting on the porch. The gardenias were done for the season, but the leaves were still green and thick, and the air smelled the way Savannah air always smells in early autumn, warm, slow, carrying something you cannot name. I told him the truth, or as much of it as a 7-year-old can hold. I said Grandma Dot made the quilt out of pieces from important days. I said she hid something inside it to keep Grandpa safe. I said the quilt was her way of saying she would always be here, even when she was not. He thought about that for a while. Then he said, "Can I make one?" I went inside and came back with a pair of fabric scissors, a needle, a spool of white thread, and a square of cotton cut from an old pillowcase. I sat beside him and showed him how to fold the edge under and stitch a straight line, the way Dorothy showed her students, the way her hands moved without hesitation across every piece of fabric she touched. He pushed the needle through, pulled the thread, and held up the single square. One piece. No pattern yet. No dates. No hidden meaning. Just a 7-year-old boy and a straight line of stitches on a summer porch in Savannah. "That is the first piece," I said. He set it on the armrest of Dorothy's chair, right where the quilt had always been. I looked at him, and then past him, at the gardenias and the iron fence and the street beyond. And I understood that Dorothy had not just left me a quilt, or a deed, or a letter in a hymnal. She had left me the pattern, the way to keep going. One stitch at a time, one piece folded into the next, until the thing you are making looks like a life. The first piece is always the one that matters most. If someone you love ever left you something that seemed ordinary, a blanket, a book, a cup, a chair, look again. Look closer. Some people do not say goodbye with words. They say it with what they leave behind. And if this story reminded you of someone, share it. Not for me, for them.